views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Well, it's a topic we've covered here on Perspectives time and time again. It's a conversation we as a country have yet to find common ground upon. Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we'll have a special panel weighing on race, relationships, and racism in America. That's coming up with yours truly, Darren Jaime.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference.
What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective?
And hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Darren Jaime, and we're glad to have you sharing with us. As always, we invite you to stay connected to us here on Perspectives, where we bring you news, information, and the topics making headlines. This is a very special Perspectives as we are getting a panel together to really talk about the issue of race, racism, and America. The recent events that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, plus President Trump's recent speech in Phoenix have ignited once again both passion, anger, and a bunch of emotions, to say the least. But we want to talk really about race and racism, because it seems as though, once again, it rears its ugly head in a major way, particularly with the issues that have happened in Charlottesville. So here on this very special edition of Perspectives, we've got a very, an esteemed panel. And, I'll introduce them to you right now. She was the first Obama for American campaign hire in New York in 2007. She's a community leader with corporate and government experience who has also run for public office, including congressional bid in 2010 and 2012. And she is the principal of Joyce Johnson Strategies and also one of Perspective's key political contributors. We welcome Joyce Johnson. Also on the show, we've got Linda Tarrant-Reed, a seasoned journalist and photographer, former managing editor of the Million Man March, contributor and researcher also of the Family of Black America, and the author of Discovering Black America from the Age of Exploration to the 21st Century. She also just released a new book, Harlem, From Dutch Suburb to Black Metropolis. I'm excited about that one. And also on the panel is Kamar Newman. He's the co-chair of the Queens County Young Democrats Caucus of Color. He's also got Newman's Political Consulting. And last but not least, our friend and brother, he's the owner of Retrovision News Media and also political analyst that you catch him here on Open, Lee Bynes. And we welcome you all to the show, and good to have you all.
Good to be back.
I want to go back to, Charlottesville for a minute. And obviously, I don't want to spend a lot of time really discussing the president's comments, because we can give him all the talk and we can have a whole show just on that. But what is very clear is the president did not meet in Charlottesville, Virginia. People met in Charlottesville, Virginia. And as people met in Charlottesville, Virginia, we understand the race, the real anger and the vigor that people were speaking with such passion. And I've often had the conversation before about, and I'll start with Joyce, that I thought that racism, we saw it in years past, but it seems like we took a real turn back to the 60s with what we saw in Charlottesville.
We did, and what is clear to me, that this becomes, in and out, and periodic. We never left it. There is racism in America, and I think with a sad thing, the Obama election brought it out in ways that we had not seen when it had sort of tamped down, become politically incorrect to express it. Now it is once more, with the advent or with the election of Donald Trump, now it's okay, in as much as he's used race, national origin, and everything else. And so it is a stream that has gone through our country forever. The election, 2008, presidential, my mother and so many of her generation, African American Southern, I never thought I'd live to see the day when a black man would become president. We are 14% of the population saying that. There's another 14% whites who said the same thing, and maybe even more, who they never thought they would live to see the day and consider what they did to his administration, his term, the language that was used about him and his family. It once again became about race and racism that's always sometimes undercover, but so now you have a president who effectively, going on that backdrop, used that as his path to the White House. So it's back again. It's less politically incorrect.
Right. Lee, from a political perspective, obviously we see the president making these comments and saying that both sides were to blame, even blaming the young lady who lost her life in this vicious attack, saying that basically she was a part of a supremacist group herself. What are we to say for presidents who make such divisive comments? Because I can't remember in my history, and I'm looking at you guys who maybe have a couple more years on me too, who say, but never have we ever seen a president be so divisive in his language.
Well, not since George Wallace from the old days
And he was
was a presidential candidate, made those type of statements. But to bring this conversation a little bit forward, about 30 years from George Wallace to the gentleman that was beaten, literally almost beaten to death in California, where I spent a large part of my life, Rodney King. He asked a very, very pertinent question, and that was, can't we all just get along? And now that we have this new president, this new person, 45, if you will, in the White House, I'm beginning to think that the answer to that question may be no. What I saw in the Charlottesville incident, and we talked about this before, when that Friday night when we saw that torchlight ceremony that went on, it looked like for miles, of a lot of angry white men, angry young white men. And the reason why the young part is so important, because that is literally the next generation. And if this next generation are carrying those feelings within their heart, then one has to ask oneself, especially if you're a person of color, specifically an African American living in this country, what's our strategy moving forward if we come to the conclusion that equality amongst the races is just not possible at this time or any time in the near future. I'd like to share an experience with you all, because I had an opportunity after my daughters finished up school to do a little traveling. And so as I traipsed around Europe, when I came home from Paris one day, I was feeling, really, really good. I had been on the subways over there. And what I noticed when I rode the subways there is I noticed that from line to line, no matter where you went, the colors never changed. If you happen to live in the Bronx and you're coming from work from downtown, by 125th Street, you start to see it filter out. By the time you hit Gun Hill Road, there's nobody of color, because the few that do come up this way are off at Morris Park and the stop before that. So what happened to me, what was such a stark reminder of the separation of the races, even here in New York, supposedly a Democratic and liberal town, is that last time I got off the plane and I decided to take the subway home. I just was feeling like that. Normally I would just get in a cab. But if I got in a cab, I would have never seen what I saw. When I took that special train from the airport into the city, I literally saw a parting of the races on the platform. Everybody, all the white people were going to Howard Beach, and all the people of color were going into Jamaica. And it was such a stark reminder to me. It was just no other way that I could put it, to say that, that old statement they say that America is more segregated on a Sunday morning, because on a Sunday morning we go to worship at church. Most of us are going to our own community churches, and there's very little overlap. So that being said, I don't want to respond as a defeatist or someone who is a pessimist that there aren't enough people, Caucasians, that are willing to embrace what America is all about. but we need an exit strategy.
And Kamar, let me talk to you about this because I'm coming to Linda. And Linda, I'm putting you on deck here so you get ready because we're going to talk about this Confederate flag thing and the history of the Confederacy. And I might have to take a break before we do that, but I want you to be on deck, get your mind ready as we get ready to come to you in a few seconds. But Kamar, for you as a young man, watching what you saw in Charlottesville, Virginia, seeing this, obviously you weren't all the way in on the 60s movement. Except for via television, Facebook, social media, but to watch this yourself, what were your feelings?
Well, my feelings towards was like, growing up, what my dad has always told me, living in America, you had 3 strikes against you. 1, you're black, 2, you're male, and 3, you're not from this country. And as I was growing up and seeing it, my first racial experience was when I went away to college in upstate New York. I was called the N-word by a white schoolmate, and I was just like baffled to see that racism was still existing at that time in 2010. And now seeing these young white men marching down in Charlottesville with the torch lit, no hoods on their face, showing that bravado that, they're out there and they want people to know who they are and how they feel about us. Well, we're ready. We're not our grandparents' generation where we, marched in silence and boycotted. We're ready and we're willing to fight for what we believe in because we're not going to sit back and be treated less of an equal. They bleed red just as we do, okay? And it's just a shame that Trump is allowing this kind of thing to exist, and he's dividing the country in such a way that, as everyone said, no other president has ever done before. But let's be real, the man was never presidential. A lot of people saying, oh, this is so unhinged for being a president, but in his head, it's normal.
Take a quick break. Got that thought in there too. Listen, coming back, Linda's going to talk, and she's going to bring us some history about the Confederacy, the Confederate flag, and what this whole thing is all about. Because some of us don't even understand what does it really mean. Well, Linda will give us the history when we return right here on Perspectives.
And I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to. My love, she keeps me warm. 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 She keeps me warm.
We are neighbors and best friends.
I love my sister.
My heart doesn't see race. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Love is kind. Love is patient.
Wow, these are really good.
You act surprised. Practice makes perfect.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of teens in foster care who don't need perfection. They need you.
And welcome back. We're continuing our very special panel discussion talking about racism in America. This following the incidents that occurred in Charlottesville, Virginia. Our panel of esteemed guests that we have with us, sharing with us Kamar Newman, and we've got also Linda Tarrant-Reed. We've got Joyce Johnson, and then also Lee Bynes sharing with us. And I started a little bit in the last segment talking, Linda, about the Confederate flag and the Confederacy, because this was the big topic of discussion. Right. Give us a little bit of background and history on where this Confederate flag comes from, the Confederacy, and why African Americans, blacks, and even some whites are very upset about the Confederate flag.
Well, the Confederacy evolved prior to the Civil War, and basically because the country was going toward freeing the enslaved individuals, the South was trying to hold on. And because it wasn't going to go their way, they seceded from the Union and created their own country, the Confederacy. So of course they had a flag. So the Civil War happened, and after the Civil War, in order for the states that seceded and to come back into the United States, America, they had to toe the line. First of all, slavery was abolished, and a lot of the people that were participating in the Confederacy, they never got over it, because the reality is slavery was an economic system. The people in the South were getting rich, and this was going to be the end of their lifestyle. They didn't have to do anything. Everything was done for them, from African Americans who were brought over to this country, kidnapped. They were not compensated. Many times they were murdered. The women were raped. So for the Southern plantation owner, the end of slavery was their worst nightmare. So in order to continue that, even though slavery was abolished, it still existed in a very strange way. You had tenant farmers who, some of them lived on the land that they tended while they were slaves. And then you've heard the stories about the company store. The people were supposed to be paid. They ran tabs up on the company store. And so when they would go at the end of the month to get their pay, everything was deducted. So they were still working for free. So this is a tradition that the Southern plantation owner and the government essentially perpetuated. And as far as what is happening today in the United States, certainly it was a milestone for the first African American president, and we were all excited about that. 2008, many people were touting a post-racial United States, but things do not happen that quickly, especially wounds that are that deep. So basically, there was a little Band-Aid put on for a minute, but the person that ripped that Band-Aid off was our current president with his birther movement. I mean, he was bent on totally, denying the fact that this African American, intelligent, attractive person was the president of the United States.
And that was rough to deal with. I think we talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
When we talked about the KKK.
Yeah. Yes.
And before, we used to see them with sheets. Yeah. With this particular movement that we saw in Charlottesville, very clearly nobody was wearing sheets. There's no white garb whatsoever, but the same message, the
Right.
same tone, the same everything. What are we to make of this, given the fact that, Joyce, back in the day they were hiding under sheets.
Well,
now
it's okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
save the
there's a
sheets.
following, and you've seen the stories or the percentages of the number of white supremacists and separatists and Nazi-inspired, an influx, like an increase of something like 76%. They are emboldened. Before it used to be, like you said, cover up, even though it might be your store owner or the guy that you in the gas station, but you don't want to know. Now it is not politically incorrect. And so, unmasked for all the world to see. And let's face it, Donald Trump has given them sort of license. Right. They are on TV, not MSNBC, but on Fox News, telling their story. The one guy that's talking about Jared and how could Donald Trump, allow his daughter to.
Blacks, it's Jews.
I mean, Jews.
Right.
I mean, so companion with blacks, there's also anti-Judah has been historic as well. Historic as well. Anyone that's not, I can't even say pure right, because I maintain the prescription for our remedy for race. Everybody do a DNA test. The same way I've got 13% Scandinavian and 2% Jewish. I maintain that white America, do the DNA and see how many of you pure white as they propose.
Got Lee and Kamar coming up on deck. We'll be right back with more. Stay with us. We're coming right back on this very special edition of Perspectives right after this.
I can't change, even if I tried, even if I wanted to.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. You know, but it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, you know, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Morning, Gary. We are GetSchooled.com. You want a college education, don't you? Gary, financial aid forms. Biology homework, G. Picking a college, man. You and us go together like tacos and Tuesday. And I love tacos.
Behold, the angry giant. Behold, the angry giant. Behold, the angry giant. Behold, the angry giant.
It only takes a moment to make a moment. Take time to be a dad today.
And welcome back to our very special panel discussion on racism in America. And Kamar, I want to talk about this, bring it a little bit closer to home. We talk about Confederate flags, Confederate statues right here in the borough of the Bronx. You know, the Confederate statues were actually removed from Bronx Community College. Your thoughts?
My thought on that is that I feel that it shouldn't have been removed. I don't think any of the Confederate statues should be removed because this is America's way of trying to cover up its history. You know, we're going to remove the statue of the Confederate generals, and, you know, over time, you're going to start seeing it be removed from our history books, and it's going to look as if the Civil War has never happened. You know, it's kind of like, you know, I'm a big history buff, and I feel for us to be able to address racism in America, we have to be able to say, there is racism in America, and having these Confederate statues up and around will let people really understand that, you know, there was a time in American history where we were fighting over black and white.
But see, I don't think that, you know, what they have is one statue. They don't have the story of who that person was in particular. There might be a plaque. Now, my thought is if you're going to have that discussion, you need to have another statue that represents the heritage of the African American struggle and have that dialogue right there so you can see an image of both what was happening in the South and then what was happening with African Americans at the same time.
You know, I'm a bit of on the fence on this one. The statues being there and in place definitely will be a reminder to us of exactly what the past was like. However, I'm also a bit of a history buff as well, and I do know that in Germany right now, you'll be hard-pressed to find any Nazi signs, any statues to Hitler or the crew that he ran with. So it's difficult to say. I think we have to understand that even though the war was supposedly ended, it really didn't. And as long as those symbols stand in front of us, people who are sensitive to that has to look at that without it being, because that is not our history. Right. That's their history.
Let me throw this question in here because
sure.
What was also said is that if you take the person out of it for a moment and just hear the comment, if we do this, then we have to get rid of Washington and others who were slave owners and the line. I
think that's going too far, and this is really a North-South debate. In addition to, you know, a race debate. You know, as a New Yorker going south, I mean, people look at me to this day, certainly 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Southerners don't like Northerners. So to your point, there has never been, you know, the bridging, the whatever. It's the North and the South or whatever. You generally don't find this in the far West, in the Midwest, yes, because that was part of the, slave territory. So a lot of this is, you know, I'm mixed with you. There are people who have believed that Northerners are basically barbaric. You know, you don't have any common sense. You're not genteel. Southern, in companion with that, the strategy, the Southern genteelness, part of this is the Confederacy way or the Southern lifestyle. And that we removed ourselves from this rankers and folks who were trying to, frankly, imperialize us or degrade us into being, you know, you're taking away our rights, in other words, taking away our property. So there's that piece. And then there are those who still, in the fringe, who see it simply as race. You know, I want to, the underclass whites want to find somebody to suppress it. Has historically been, you know, the blacks, the overseers, you know, clans and all. And maybe you have a better.
No, I agree with what you're saying. One of the interesting things that we need to put forward is that the Ku Klux Klans arose out of the Civil War. These were former Confederate soldiers that got together and formed this terrorist group. I mean, one of the first terrorist groups in the United States. And their main goal was to terrorize blacks, Jews, and anybody that supported African Americans in their struggle for equal rights. And one of the main structures of Southern legal law was the Jim Crow laws. And for those who don't know what Jim Crow laws are, it separated the black race from the white race in all, you know,
schools,
accommodations.
Everything.
They had black wives, white wives, black pools, white pools, bathrooms that were separate, water fountains that were separate, libraries that were separate, restaurants that were separate. So on some level, and some people think that segregation was a good thing for black people because at that time we created a lot of businesses. We had these wonderful, you know, hubs where we had the beauty parlor, the barber shop, the grocery store, the drug store, and all of the places that we needed to live our lives because we were excluded. So it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
And the other thing I wanted to say about Trump, what he has done is he has given everyone who has been hiding in their little corners a license to say whatever is on their mind and all of the feelings of being disenfranchised. Because as you know, I don't know the date, but by 2020 or whatever, brown people will be the majority population in the United States. And that is the fear. So what we had with the election of Donald Trump was multifold. You had a backlash against the election of Barack Obama.
Well, we come to the end of our show, but the conversation will continue. Join us for on the web, for the full hour of this very special taping at www.bronxnet.org/TV/perspectives. I'm Darren Jaime, and we thank you for watching.
We are together. And for the last 20 years, we have been building on a vision to share our views, our voices on our channels. We are the Bronx. We are BronxNet.
On this web special of Perspectives, my panel will weigh in on race relationships and racism in America. In the recent weeks, the country has been dealing with extremely high racial tensions. Radical groups like the KKK and white nationalists have resurfaced and emboldened their display of hate and bigotry. The question on the hearts and minds of many is, how does America have an open and honest dialogue about race and racism in America? Joining me now to weigh in are some very distinguished individuals on our panel. She's the principal of Joyce Johnson Strategies and one of Perspective's key political contributors, Joyce Johnson. We also have Linda Tarrant Reed, a seasoned journalist and photographer, former managing editor of the Million Man March contributor, and also researcher of the family of Black America, and the author of books Discovering Black America from the Age of Exploration to the 21st Century, as well as Harlem from Dutch suburb to Black metropolis. And also on the panel, Kamar Newman. He's the co-chair of the Queens County Young Democrats Caucus of Color and also Newman Political Consulting. And last but not least, the owner of Retrovision News Media, Lee Bynes, who's also our political contributor on Open. Now, before we continue, we want to see what the public has to say about this issue. We've got some interviews from people on the street.
I don't think race relationship in America has changed within the past 5 to 10 years. I think, if anything, we've gotten really good at just hiding things and just going with the flow.
I think it's changed and for the better, but then I also think that there are certain things that stayed the same, and now I think the problem now is eternal racism. I've had conversations where we've had to talk about race and what is going on, and I've been lectured so many times about what it's like to be a black woman in America and what you have to do to get what you want and so many other things.
We started opening up on the conversation of racism, but we haven't opened up nearly enough. Compared to the past 40 years, the things that we have accomplished is great. Like, we have a black president, we're starting to make the right movements for women and stuff like that. But in general, our talks haven't done enough to address the foundation of racism.
Now it's getting out of hand, totally out of hand. Something must be done. The government's got to get together to get all these people together. We have to work together. We are one. Okay?
And thank you for joining us. We are in a very special episode of Perspectives on a panel discussion on race, racism, and relations in America. We're pleased to be joined by a very esteemed panel who continue to bring us the latest in regards to talking. I want to start with you, Kamar, about this whole notion about we saw a lot of white nationalists, supremacists, young. And when you look at that, and we look at the society today, and we see young millennials, and you represent a millennial generation, what does one generation of millennials say to what you just saw?
Well, what we could say is that, this is happening in our generation, and it never went away. So now our eyes are open to what is coming down the pipeline. A lot of millennials are starting to also have kids, so now we are starting to create a foundation for our kids where they don't have to experience this form of racism anymore, and even as difficult as that's going to be because of who the president is at the moment and the rhetoric that he's pushing, it's going to take some time.
And so let me also get here, and I'll let Joyce go. Let me say this, because I heard this comment said, and I think we talked about this on the news ourselves, Lee, when the president actually said, when it comes to race relations and him, the race relations are either the same or better under his administration than ever before.
Well, everything is better under his administration, remember.
Than ever before. But we're pretty well-founded in the realities of what's going on. And where race relations has definitely taken a step back under him, we do have to recognize that they were really never that good in the first place.
Right.
To this young man's point, now that we understand what the playing field looks like, African Americans, people of color, brown people, et cetera, we're under the gun. We always have been under the gun, and we probably always will. That being said, what is our strategy moving forward? As you know, I have a lot of respect for the Jewish people, because they too have been caught in the crosshairs of white supremacy. But the Jewish people have been able to find a safe space for themselves. They created a country called Israel. And when things get hot, and Jewish people live all over the world, but when things get a little difficult, and they have in Europe, as of late, in the last couple of years, I've been hearing a lot of stories, they have an exit strategy. I could always go home. And this young man right here, coming from another country, has that as an option too. As African Americans, we don't have an option. So if we don't have an option moving forward, then we have to create what's called an exit strategy. Now, I wrote a book called the Race-Related, the Rise and Fall of the African American. The rise began in the mid-60s, and our fall started to begin in the 80s, and we've been falling ever since. So at the end of the book, the book is a compilation of a lot of blog posts that I've made, but it evolves into an exit strategy for African Americans who may want to find a way to leave this country if they are inclined to do so.
Right, and let me jump here with Linda, because
I was going to say, leaving the country for me, is not an option.
I'm not
We built this
built
country.
the country.
That's what
we,
I was going-
we
okay.
were here.
built the
We were
country.
here. And money.
1619.
Well, before that, many people believe that Africans came over on longboats way before Columbus. And when you think in terms of the Spanish exploration, and there were black people that came over in the 1500s. I mean, we've been here from the beginning.
Well, I want to throw this to you so you can get this, and I'm coming back to you, Joyce. I hear him talk about build a wall, but I want to talk here in New York about building Wall Street and the African American.
The enslaved.
Right.
Right. The enslaved were part of the building of New York City, which was New Amsterdam in the 1600s. And originally, the first group of Africans that were brought over here by the Dutch were free. They were free black people who came over to build downtown because that was the hub. There was a fort there, Fort Amsterdam. And beyond that, there were other outbuildings. But the fort had a wall. That was one wall. But at some point, as the community stretched out, going uptown, they needed to build a wall to protect that lower community from the Native Americans, who it was their land. And basically, the Dutch came and encroached on it. So the wall that they built is considered is at the same place that Wall Street is now. So Wall Street was named for the wall that was built by the enslaved Africans that were brought over. Actually, they weren't enslaved. They were free. And they were called company Negroes because they were the municipal workers of New Amsterdam. They built Broadway. They built all the Post Road. And they ended up, a group of them ended up in Harlem also.
Come back, Joyce gets the first word when we come back in our next segment, and we're taking a quick break. We'll be right back right after this.
How can I help my daughter with her reading?
Searching for help with Dachshund Reading.
No.
Let me try. Sarah's bright, but when she's reading, she has trouble sounding out words.
Playing world music.
What?
I give up.
Wait, I was trying to show you how Sarah feels every day. Frustrating, isn't it? Redirecting to understood.org.
Join parents and experts at understood.org, a free online resource about learning and attention issues to help your child thrive.
And back here, continue our conversation here on Perspectives, our panel discussion, and we've got our panelists, and yes, it's just so hot that even during the break, we can't just shut it down. But I want to begin and go back to Joyce, because Joyce, you wanted to make a point before.
Yeah, I wanted to make a point to Kamar. He says, you know, his generation, my generation, baby boomers, those folks who were, you know, against the civil rights, who were spitting on blacks in counters and, you know, protesting all of that, those are our children, grandchildren, and millennials. And so this is generational. And we don't, and I also want to point out that the majority of the folks who the counter-protesters, I've watched them around the country, they've been whites.
Yes.
So this is not a racist country, but there's a segment of racism that's significant and runs deep. But we also, I think we have a place in this as well. More of us must show up.
Us meaning?
African American.
Okay.
The folks, you know, I don't want anybody else fighting my battle. You know, fighting my battle. We should be leading the battle. Of course, Black Lives Matter is involved in this, but in terms of the visuals, the majority of folks I've seen in these protests have been white.
But I think it's because, you know, some of us African Americans are really divided when it comes to should I be out there, you know, fighting against racism, you know, what happened on TV, is it racist? They start questioning themselves if they should really be out there and join in this fight. And this is why, you know, there's not as much of us out there as there should be.
The country responds to numbers and visuals.
Right.
Donald Trump is big with the visuals, his rallies, his crowds, and, you know, certainly more, the inauguration 5 times what Obama ever had, the numbers. We must, there should have never been any kids in protesting in our southern, you know, John Lewis, that generation and all of that. They moved this country along. Your generation and all of us still have skin in the game.
And that was the other thing that I was going to say, that the civil rights movement, because I'm a boomer also, and this was something that was bred in us at the dinner table, you know, watching TV.
That's true.
We watched, I mean, Jet magazine, every time, you know, the weekly magazine, Ebony magazine, covered all of that, you know, distress that was going on all through the country. So we didn't have the internet, but we had these publications. The churches were very involved. The African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. We are known as the Freedom Church. We're the church of Frederick Douglass, who was, you know, one of the earliest activists. Harriet Tubman, who was also a member of the church. So the churches were vital in pushing the agenda for equal rights. Always. I mean, when I was in Sunday school, one of the things that we would have to do is we would do voter registration. Our community is not doing that these days.
That's right.
We have stepped back from the struggle. Right. I don't know whether it's struggle fatigue or whether too many of us have achieved the dream.
I'm not certain that there's a political solution to this. If we're relying on the Democratic Party, progressives, et cetera,
I'm talking
to
about
help
people
us,
power.
Well, yeah, and that's where it has to where it starts and where it ends is with us as a people.
Right.
And I'm of a different view. I mentioned earlier that we need to have a exit strategy for those of us who just don't see a positive future in America. But for those who don't, for those who do want to stay and fight the fight and continue the struggle, I think we'd be wise to create a safe space or safe spaces where African Americans can live. You know, we have our Asian brothers and sisters who have Chinatown, Koreatown. We have Italians who have Little Italy. And I don't care where you go in this world, you will find a Chinatown, all right?
Okay,
and so
where
is it?
So let me throw the argument out here.
Sure.
You got New York City, you got blacks, you got Harlem, you have Brooklyn, and that used to be the safe space, the safe haven. Now you got Harlem that's gentrified. You got Brooklyn that's gentrified.
The Bronx is happening right
the
now.
Bronx, yeah, you got the parts of the Bronx that are happening right now. So where do you go for a safe space when you talk about gentrification?
Well, you need financial independence. That's the only avenue out of this problem is financial independence. Once you have enough money to create a safe space, you have to have enough money to protect it. Okay?
I think politically, what we need to do is start getting rid of these establishment politicians that have been sitting in these seats for so long and starting to feed off of the African American community, and it's starting to change. I mean, look at the Bronx. At one point, the Bronx was, prominent, it was black and Latinos, and now if you go down to the South Bronx, you start seeing the white people that are coming up from, moving up from Manhattan into the Bronx.
District, right?
Yeah. So, and the reason behind that is people like, Ruben Diaz Jr., who's sitting in his office and, having these land use committees and approving all of these different businesses, and they're not black-owned businesses, but all these different businesses to come into the community, and then people are starting to come up here and it's starting to change. It shouldn't be like that. We need to start electing people that are going to join this fight, because now the fight has changed. It's not like it used to be in the 60s. You have the technology age now. The fight has changed, and it's a fight where, millennials are getting involved, so we need to start helping the young people like myself to get into these positions to start, fixing our communities.
So, Joyce, is political activism, I got 2 minutes on this, is political activism going to be, is it stronger now than it was in the 60s, or are we seeing it?
Oh, no, it's not as strong. No, it has fallen off. And
I had to ask the question. I just had to ask the question. I knew
and
the
this
answer.
goes to everybody that knows me. My pat line is, your doggone vote is the one equalizer. People died for you to have the vote. And with 70,000 votes placed in key states, Donald Trump would be back to Mar-a-Lago and his palace on Fifth Avenue. And we've talked about this. The number of us who sat home, 90 million Americans sat home. Disproportionately throughout the South, black folks did. So, my vote doesn't matter. The political answer is politics is a numbers game. And who has the more numbers than the others control the scenario. The Congress, the presidency, and our Senate. It would be a crazy wash, but Donald Trump's so crazy that he's messing up. So yes,
and I think we can't take our eyes off the fact that Trump is mandating a whole purging of the voter roll.
Exactly.
And for people who have sat out elections over a period of time, they're going to go to the polls, and their names are going to be totally erased. I mean, so for me, what I think has to happen, I think it has to start in the home, with the families, with the education of the children. I mean, because when you think in terms of how we grew up, our parents were activists.
That's right.
They might not have been at the March on Washington, but they encouraged, they supported. People knew what was going on. I think people right now, families, black families in particular, are so distracted with just trying to keep, themselves afloat, that they're not looking at the bigger picture on how all of this political, agenda is impacting on their life and constricting their lives.
I'll even push it a step further. Say not just black families, you got Latino families and white families.
That's
because I think everybody is just.
New arriving immigrant.
You have people just trying to survive.
Exactly.
I think it's economic because the rich people are fine. The 1% are fine. They're not worried about anything. They have Donald Trump in the White House, and every time he turns his head, the stock market goes up. Or he turns his head the other way, and the stock market goes down. So what they're looking, and the reason why he has that base support of 35%, these are people who are waiting for a payday, because that's why he's in the White House.
Well, you know what?
We had to look at this, you talk about people having to get out and vote and to help change the system, but a lot of the people in the middle class don't feel the system represents them and feel as if the system has failed them multiple times. And with Donald Trump being elected, that's true. The system did fail us, So having people to register and vote, I went out there and tried to get people to register to vote. And a lot of times they look at me and they go, well, why do I need to vote? What is it doing for me? What is it doing for my community? Look what has happened when, my mom went out there and voted. Her vote didn't really count. And this is what we need to explain to the black community, how their vote really takes place. I tell a lot of people that, your local elections matter most in the presidential election.
Right. I got to get into leagues. We're moving short on time.
Well, I'm of the opinion that, and I agree that a lot of people fought and died for us to be able to vote. But that paradigm has changed significantly. In this last election, when Donald Trump was elected, I looked at the field, and we had Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now, I'm going to make this a little controversial here, but from my opinion, I look back at the Clintons' background and realize that it was Hillary and Bill Clinton during their time is when they changed the laws. They locked up a lot of black men with these over-the-top sentencing guidelines, and the thought of voting to put that type of mindset back into the White House was almost as bad as putting Trump into the White House.
But to
so
be fair,
that vote,
that was at the urgence of the black electeds around the country and urban areas. It really was. So it was companion. The scourge of drugs and companion with laws and all of that at the urging. So it was. We were not, on the side, we the people are on the sideline, you know, with all of this. But
Well, let me take a break and we'll come back and we'll pick it up.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah.
Take a quick break, be right back.
Our communities, elected officials, every last one, the Congressional Black Caucus, because in communities of color particularly, it was rampant with drugs and companion, you know.
And we're going to take a quick break. Hold on, let me take a break because I thought we were going. We're going to break. We'll be right back.
Open up your books to page 360.
Did you just look at your phone while you was in class? You played yourself.
Talking about inspirational quotes.
You gotta believe in yourself. Don't ever play yourself. The key is to make it, so make it.
Louise, can you give me an example of an inspirational quote?
Don't play yourself. The key is to make it.
And who said that?
I did. Now that's a major key alert.
Learn the real major keys to getting to college at getschool.com.
Most party fouls are pretty dumb. But if you decide to drink and drive underage, you could lose your license and your freedom. Underage drinking and driving, the ultimate party foul.
I'm only 17, but I know about investing. Believe in something, buy shares in it, watch it grow. So, what if you could invest in the future? The future of kids, like a stock. Not the kind of stock that's about making money, but a stock for social change. A whole new kind of investment called Better Futures. When you invest, it helps kids go to college. I could be one of the first college graduates from my family, the first philanthropist from my neighborhood. And if I'm the first, then maybe there's a second and a third. Believe in us, invest in us, watch us grow. My name is Sydney, and I'm your dividend.
Back here on Perspectives, continue with our esteemed panel, and we're continuing to talk about race, racism, and race relations here in America. So let me ask the question. We got a few minutes left, and so I'm going to ask the question that you can answer in a few minutes. How do we make it better? How do we make race relations better in America? Come on.
We have to have a conversation. We need to sit down and address it, stop acting as if it doesn't exist. And especially amongst the, African American community, we need to sit down and think of a solution of how we're gonna take back our communities and essentially bring back the black wealth.
Okay.
I agree totally with that, because when you think in terms of where we had our strength is when we were independent, when we had money to support all of the institutions in our community. I'm not saying that we should, totally segregate ourselves. We do that anyway, because if you look at any neighborhood, any community, black people live in a certain section, Italian people live in a certain section, Georgia, and it's all based on the fact that we're tribal. We're more comfortable with the people that, we're related to. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I believe is that we have to really learn about the economy and figure out ways to bring it into our communities.
Joyce.
And I agree with her about the tribal piece. What can't be a part of that tribal piece is racism. Racism directed at any group, African Americans and Jews. And this has got to be a conversation not only amongst ourselves, but with all Americans, to sit down and have that hard conversation, because maybe one of my best friends in North Carolina is a serious Trump supporter. I got to have a conversation with him to find out why.
I'm not sure we can make it better. That's why I think that African Americans or people of color need to create a safe space where they can enjoy. I mean, I understand that we are already broken up significantly and specifically by race and religion where we live. but I think African American communities aren't up to par. We have not made them the type of spaces that that we'd be comfortable in staying in, because as soon as you get a couple of dollars, the first thing you do, you move out. And the successful amongst us, that's the worst thing that we could do, because we need to stick around to let those following behind us see what success as a person of color looks like. So to run away from your community will only jeopardizes it. And I think the most disturbing thing about this whole incident and the conversation that we're having is watching a specific segment of white America recast themselves as the victim. That's what we're watching happen right now amongst a lot of young white males. They're casting themselves as a victim because they feel as though any accomplishments that we achieve came at their expense.
Let me get a quick answer on this one. Do we see more people go to polls next presidential election?
Yes.
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 One can only hope.
Had to be lit.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, because
hope.
I think the biggest thing that we're talking about also is there has to be some political activism. And the question is whether or not there's going to be activism or apathy. And right now, you know, it's...
I think people are pretty fired up. I mean, this Trump tenure has people talking like we are, and I think people are motivated. I think there are going to be more people running. I think people that
indeed.
I think people.
Kamar's going to be running for office.
Okay.
So, you know, get him out there.
I just think I think, you know, if you want to talk about how bad it is, I think there's always a silver lining.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to let you know that as we continue with this panel discussion, and we've continued on this panel discussion, you can always watch this as you're watching this on the web, but also go back to bronxnet.org. You can see the past episode of this show, and then also tune into BronxNet and Perspectives to get the first half hour. We want you to watch it on www.bronxnet.org/perspectives. There you'll be able to see this episode, of course, but then also the past episode that actually led into this. I want to thank our esteemed panel for sharing with us, Joyce Johnson, Lee Bynes, Kamar, and also Linda Tarrant Reed. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us and being a part of this very special discussion. And well, hopefully we'll have you back again on a better note.
No, I think we need to continue this because even for the public, you know, so much of our in prep for this, I went back and set up, you know, because he had about the 13th Amendment, you know, the Article 1, you know, the whole whatever. And I remember, you know, reading this in history. Very much, kids today don't know anything about this.
That's why I got Linda sitting right here, give out the good history.
That's why I said, you know, for us to really help with race relations in America, we have to keep having this conversation.
Yes, indeed.
Time and time again until it is in people's
But the next
head.
time, I think it would be pretty cool if we had some white people on.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
that we could get their point of view and see how they feel from their perspective.
Right. That's what Perspectives is about. Listen, I got to wrap out of here. Thank you very much for watching this Web Perspectives.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most.